Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to Rock Talk with Dr. Cropper. On today's episode, we are going to be discussing Led Zeppelin's 1972 North American tour. This was their eighth time through North America, despite it taking place just under 4 years after they had formed. They came through four times in 1969, twice in 1970, and once in 1971 before this. Now, tours were described a little bit differently back then, certainly for an artist that was just starting as they were in 1969. So nowadays, but all of those North American tours happening in 1 year and the European tours in between would be probably classified as different legs of the same tour. But at that time, they were all considered to be separate. So anyhow, this is their eighth time through North America, and it was relatively short, only 17 shows, and all in the month of June, from June 6th through the 28th. They had played a handful of shows in February in Australia and New Zealand, and then they did two warm-up shows for this tour in Europe, Amsterdam, May 27th, and Brussels, May 28th. And then they had this North American trek, and then they had another gap before some shows in Japan in the fall, and then a string of shows through the UK in November, December in 72. So this tour took place between Led Zeppelin 4 and Houses of the Holy. Led Zeppelin 4 was released November 8th, 1971, and Houses would come out in March of 73. They actually recorded some of it during this tour at Electric Ladyland Studios in New York, and would debut some of the songs from that album on this tour. It is believed that around this time, likely on this tour, was when Zeppelin's manager, Peter Grant, began enforcing his demand that the band keep 90% of the gate, so basically ticket sales, which was unprecedented at that time, but perhaps surprisingly, perhaps not, promoters took it because any deal with Zeppelin was better than none with them at all. And this is another example of Peter Grant's influence on the industry, particularly touring. You know, the Beatles get, rightfully so, a lot of praise for their influence on the industry from a recording and songwriting perspective. But I would argue that Zeppelin were equally influential in changing the industry from a touring perspective. One unforeseen issue that this tour faced was it took place at the same time as the Rolling Stones' 1972 North American tour, which was a much larger production. They played 48 dates from June 3rd to July 26th, and they stole the lion's share of the press coverage at the time, which frustrated the band because they felt that they were putting on a better show. It was certainly a longer show. The average show on their tour would have been twice as long as the average show on the Stones tour, and a few of the nights where Zeppelin really stretched it out would have been almost 3 times longer. So you can understand their frustration, and they also felt, not just lengthwise, that their show is superior, which I don't know. I guess I would agree that they're doing some things that were more complicated or requiring more virtuosity, but it was also the Stones' peak from a live perspective. Having Mick Taylor and everything. So I wish I could have seen both tours, but I was born in '95, so I saw neither. Anyhow, this caused the band to hire a public relations firm to help promote subsequent tours so that wouldn't happen to them again. So as far as the dates for this tour, they, for the most part, moved east to west. June 6th, they were in Detroit. June 7th, they were in Montreal. June 9th, Charlotte, North Carolina. June 10th, Buffalo, which is one of the 3 shows for which there is no recording as of yet, unfortunately. June 11th, Baltimore. June 13th, Philadelphia. June 14th and 15th, New York, at Nassau Coliseum out in Uniondale on Long Island because of union disputes at Madison Square Garden. June 17th in Portland, Oregon. June 18th in Seattle, which was supposed to be in Vancouver, but there were some rioting issues and whatnot, so they moved it to Seattle at the last minute and brought people down from Vancouver on buses. Then June 19th in Seattle again. June 21st in Denver, which is another one that doesn't have a recording as of yet. June 22nd in San Bernardino. June 23rd in San Diego, which is the last of the 3 with no recordings yet. June 25th, Los Angeles at the Forum. June 27th in Long Beach, and June 28th in Tucson, Arizona. So a very short tour of the States, and the last of the short ones, the 73, 75, and 77 trips through North America would all be in the upper 30s to mid 40s as far as number of shows. 77 was supposed to be 51 before they had to cancel the last little bit. So yeah, a brief, compact jaunt through the States in 72, but a very good one. The set list for this tour, for the most part, was Immigrant Song flowing straight into Heartbreaker, which I think was their best opening 1-2 punch that they ever had, and this would actually be the last tour that they used that as the opening punch. They had debuted it about 2 years earlier, June 28th, 1970, at the Bath Festival in England, and yeah, it worked really well for them for the 2 years that a lot of people would say were their live peak. And then Black Dog third, Since I've Been Loving You, Stairway to Heaven, then the acoustic set, Going to California, That's the Way, Tangerine, Bron Rar Stomp, and then Dazed and Confused, What Is and What Should Never Be, Moby Dick, and Whole Lotta Love, which would feature a medley of about 4 to 6 old rock and roll or blues songs thrown in there, which was always a nice jolt of spontaneity. And then the encores were usually some mix of rock and roll, Communication Breakdown, and occasionally Thank You. And then later in the tour, they started to pull out some songs from Houses of the Holy and mix in Over the Hills and Far Away, Dancing Days, The Ocean, and The Crunch in the middle of Dazed and Confused. So that was the average set list, and I'll mention the exceptions to that as they come up when we get into the rankings of the shows. I think it's a pretty good set list. It was the first tour that, well, other than the Australia, New Zealand shows earlier in the year, where Dazed and Confused was starting to move later in the set. It's the year before, it was in sort of the same position it had been in 1970 in the first third of the show, and would be followed immediately by Stairway to Heaven, which they would link those two up again in 73 and 75. But 72 is kind of unique because Dazed got promoted to later in the show, a year before Stairway did. And this tour also marked the last time in North America, at least, that Whole Lotta Love would consistently have a long medley. They kept it for the Japan and UK shows later in 72, and then through the first part of 73 in the UK and Europe, but then cut it back to only the Boogie Chillin' portion when they came back through the States in 73, which I understand why they dropped it, because they wanted to make room for material from House of the Holy and didn't want to play 4 hours every night. But the medley was always a nice, as I said earlier, a little jolt of spontaneity into the set list, and was really fun to listen to in the earlier shows. At first, the medley would be in How Many More Times back in 69 and early 70, and then it switched to being in Whole Lotta Love. And furthermore, this was the last time in the States, and really I would say the last tour, where they fairly frequently did a kind of long string of encores, and would shake up the encores a decent amount night to night. After that, it became a bit more static as far as what the rotation was for the encores, and they would only usually do one or two a night. I've seen this tour described as the heaviest Zeppelin tour, or 72 described as the heaviest year, and the person who said it didn't really offer much of an explanation, and I've thought about it a lot and sort of listened for it as I go through the tour, and I can see where they're coming from. On the one hand, this was kind of a transitional year for them between the 70-71 sort of period and what they would become in 73. And part of this you can hear in Page's guitar tone, which I think might be what contributes to people considering this one of the heaviest years. Because in 72, I find that Page's tone is kind of a mix between, like, the halfway point between the warm, thick tone that he had in 71 and the uber aggressive, snarly, almost bordering on anemic at times tone that he had in 73, which gives it a really full and powerful attack sound. And then another factor along the same lines of timbre is Bonham's, his drums. So he was still playing the Emerald Sparkle Ludwig kit at this point, which is my favorite kit of his aesthetically, and I would probably say sonically as well. But the unique thing about this tour is his snare sound. It sounds different from other tours, and I've been trying to think of how he got it to sound the way that it does. I think it's, and I haven't tested this on my own snare because I don't want to mess it up and it take me months to get it back to how I wanted it, but it sounds to me like he was playing with very fresh new heads, but tuned a little bit lower. So it sounds responsive, but a bit deeper. So I think that contributes to the heavy sound of this tour as well. Now, having said that, I think heavy is a bit of a problematic term that sometimes gets thrown around too loosely in music and especially rock discussions. It's problematic because A, it's kind of ambiguous, and B, it's pretty subjective. I mean, John Lennon said, accurately, you might say, that Ticket to Ride was the first heavy metal song, and people sort of looked at him funny. He said it's pretty explicative heavy for then, being 1965, and you can't really argue with him. So I'm kind of hesitant to throw around terms like that. It's one of those things you kind of know it when you hear it, like, oh yeah, this show's like heavier than that one, but you can't really explain why. So I try to avoid just throwing that term around. If I had to pick a heaviest tour, though, I'm not sure if I would go with 72. Uh, One of the things that gives me pause is Plant's vocal condition, which he still had some of his high range, but he had some sort of injury to his voice at the first Los Angeles show in 1971 on August 21st. And after that, even when he hit the high notes pre-surgery, um, they didn't sound nearly as full anymore. His voice sounded a little bit hollow and kind of thin. So if I was going to pick one of these earlier years as the heaviest, I would probably be tempted to say 71 when his voice was just otherworldly. Yeah, pre-injury in August, that is. But 73 would be a strong candidate for that as well, because of Page's really snarly, aggressive guitar tone that I mentioned earlier. But then Bonham's Amber Vistalite kit that he switched to for the North American portion of 73 sounds a little bit too twangy to me sometimes. So I feel like that could disqualify it. I might be tempted to say 77 is the heaviest on a good night. That is partly because of the set list, which opening with The Song Remains the Same, Sick Again, Nobody's Fault But Mine, In My Time of Dying, Since I've Been Loving You, No Quarter, and A Long No Quarter is a pretty dark and heavy start to a concert. And then even the acoustic set in 77 feels a lot darker than the other acoustic sets because of having the Battle of Evermore, and then making their way out of that with White Summer into Kashmir, and then Achilles' Last Stand, which I would say is the heaviest song in their catalog, and combine that with Bonham's just massive sounding stainless steel kit and Jones's alembic bass, which sounds kind of darker than the Fender Jazz that he used before that, and just the overall sort of dark vibe that was surrounding the band in 77, which I'll talk about a bit more in the 77 episode probably. I'd probably go with 77 if I was picking a quote unquote heaviest Zeppelin tour, but as I say, I'm not really a huge fan of that term. Anyhow, yeah. Okay, so I think now I will just skip right to my ranking of the shows and can get into a little bit more detail as we go along. Actually, one more quick thing before we do that. I mentioned the Whole Lotta Love medley. This tour is actually not one of my favorites for the Whole Lotta Love medleys, because the ones that were sort of mainstays in the medley throughout the tour, I'm not a huge fan of. Every single time they played it, basically they started it off with, and this goes for not just this tour, they started the medley with Boogie Chillin' by John Lee Hooker, which surprisingly enough, I love the original, like John Lee Hooker's original, but I've never been a huge fan of the way that Zeppelin covered it in the Whole Lotta Love medleys, which always surprised me because usually I like their covers at least as well as the original, but not in this case. And then beyond Boogie Chillin', the two songs that were most consistently in the middle of the medley on this tour were Hello Mary Lou and Let's Have a Party, the Wanda Jackson song that Elvis sang as well. And I'm not a huge fan of either of those, so that always kind of drags these medleys down for me compared to the 70 and 71 medleys that uh, I think were a bit more diverse and had more songs that I liked. And then they would always close the medley, not just in 72, with uh, a long blues, more improvisational one, which on this tour was Going Down Slow, which is my least favorite of the long blues end of the medley songs that they would do. In 1970 and first bit of 71, it would be Muddy Waters' Honeybee, which I really liked in that spot. And then they'd used You Shook Me a few times in Japan in 71, and then Going Down Slow on this tour. And then in Europe 73, which was the last tour that had the medley, it was the I Can't Quit You Baby. And sometimes with a bit of the Lemon song at the end. That was probably my favorite of the long blues ending of the medley songs, partly because of how well they were playing instrumentally in Europe 73. This 72 tour did have some really cool ones thrown into the medleys as well. I only wish that if they had to have ones that were played fairly consistently each night, they would have been different ones than the ones that they were. But anyhow, what are you going to do? So, ranking the shows, as I said, there were 17 shows on the tour, but 3 of them have not seen a recording surface yet, so we only have 14 to rank. I should also mention that the Amsterdam show for sure, and maybe Brussels might rank slightly higher than a few at the bottom of the ranking of the North American shows. In Amsterdam, they played Celebration Day, which they only did at one show in North America, and It's Whole Lotta Love medley had Running Bear, That's All Right, and Hoochie Coochie Man, which I haven't heard them play very often. That might have been the only time, but I don't not quote me on that. And in Brussels, the medley had Running Bear, Lottie Miss Claudie, Heartbreak Hotel, and Don't Be Cruel. So much better Elvis choices there than some of the shows in the States. And a few of the shows in Australia and New Zealand had neat ones in the medley too. Anyhow, so number 14 for the North American tour, I have Charlotte on June 9th. This show certainly still has its bright spots. It's the only North American show where they played Celebration Day, but it also has some subdued, bordering on sloppy playing for the majority of the show, I would say. They don't do the medley at all in Whole Lotta Love, which was the first time in like 2 years that they played it without a medley. And yeah, it certainly would rank higher than a lot of shows in subsequent years, but the competition is fierce on this tour. Number 13, I have San Bernardino on June 22nd. This one feels a little bit tired, apart from Paige, who plays really well. I can understand why, because the day before they were in Denver, and based on all accounts of people that were there, Denver got a marathon set list like the second night in Seattle did, and like the show at the Forum in LA did. And, you know, heading there with only one day off after the Seattle show, and then straight to San Bernardino for a show the next day with, time zone changes and the altitude thing with Denver and everything. I can understand why they might have been a little bit tired in San Bernardino. But as I say, Page has a good showing, and it still has some inspired moments. It has the most standard version of the medley as you could get on this tour, just Boogie Chillin', Let's Have a Party, Hello Mary Lou, and Going Down Slow, which is the medley as it appears on the original release of How the West Was Won, which I just realized I have neglected to mention so far, so I'm going to interject about that real quick. One of only, I guess you would say 3, if you count the BBC sessions, live albums, official live albums in Zeppelin's catalog, released in 2003, was a mix of the LA and Long Beach shows from this tour. I would say overall it's a much better, more cohesive live album than The Song Remains the Same, which represents the 1973 North American tour. And if you, to the casual fan, I think they don't really need to listen beyond that, partly because the sound quality of the bootlegs for all the other shows is average to decent for most of them, with a few being really bad and a few being pretty good. So How the West Was Won, I think, definitely is a fair representation of this tour, apart from the fact that they didn't include Tangerine and cut a few of the extra encores and medley treats from the Los Angeles show. Anyhow, so number 12, I have Seattle on June 18th, the first night. Now, this one very well could rank quite a few spots higher if a full recording came out, but as it stands right now, the recording only runs from the beginning through Going to California. But what we do have is really good, a particularly great version of Since I've Been Loving You. So yeah, that one could jump up a fair ways if a more complete recording surfaced. At number 11, I have the show in Portland, another relatively incomplete recording. This one runs from from Going to California to the end, so basically the opposite of the Seattle show the night after. This Portland show is one of Plant's best nights of the year, and the sound quality makes it a tad hard to judge, but seems like it was a very good show, and like the first night in Seattle, could climb the ranks a fair bit if a complete recording ever surfaces. At number 10, I have Philadelphia on June 13th. This is another pretty fragmentary recording. It runs from Heartbreaker through the very beginning of Moby Dick, but it has an extra in there. They play Bring It On Home after Black Dog for the first time since the Belfast show in March of 1971. This show has a really rough recording, even for somebody with bootleg ears like myself. Probably the worst recording of the tour, but what you're able to discern from underneath all of the sludge and noise of the recording seems like a pretty good show, and the addition of Bring It On Home in a unusual spot in the set list for this year gives it a little bit of a boost over the two before it that were also partial recordings. Number 9, I have Detroit, June 6th, the first night of the tour. This one only surfaced last year, actually. Before that, there had been no recording, and what did surface is partial as well. It runs from Bron-Rar Stomp through Rock and Roll, the encore, but a lot of people think there may have been more encores after that are cut off. But what we do have is very good, and the reason I put it ahead of the other fragmentary ones is, well, first of all, they include a bit of Turn On Your Love Light during Dazed and Confused, which is unusual. They played it a few times in Whole Lotta Love, but I'm pretty sure this is the only time they play it in Dazed and Confused, which is neat. And Whole Lotta Love at this show features Running Bear in the medley, which also gives it a boost because I love that song. And I wish they would have played it more often because it's one of the ones that I do think they did better than the original even. Next up, I have two that are very close together, but I think I'm going to say number 8, I have Montreal, June 7th. This one has one of the few versions of Thank You on this tour in the Encores, which usually suggested that the band were feeling good that night and pleased with the performance and the crowd's response. And the medley in this Whole Lotta Love is Boogie Chillin', Hello Mary Lou, Running Bear again. The Detroit and Montreal, the only two times they played it in the States here. And then Money Honey, A Mess of Blues, Going Down Slow, but they also throw in some hints of When the Levee Breaks in Going Down Slow, which gives this one points for uniqueness. And the playing is quite good throughout. At number 7, I have Baltimore, June 11th. This one features very aggressive playing from the start. Bonham really goes nuts in Heartbreaker. Has a very good version of Dazed and Confused. I was listening to it while I was cutting the grass, and I was worried I was going to cut off my foot. It grabbed my attention that much. And it has a neat Whole Lotta Love medley, one of the longer ones this tour. It has 6 songs. Boogie Chillin', I Need Your... Montreal had 6 too, actually. Boogie Chillin', I Need Your Love Tonight, Hello Mary Lou, Heartbreak Hotel, Going Down, the Don Nix song, and then Going Down Slow. And it also has one of maybe the best versions of Moby Dick this tour. It clocks in over 27 minutes, and there's a cut in the tape. So Bonham was definitely feeling it this night, and I really enjoyed listening to this one. I should have mentioned earlier that before this year, I had never listened to most of the shows on the tour. But then this year, partly because of having extra time due to quarantine, and partly because of this podcast, wanting to have listened to all of them before I give you guys my thoughts on it, I decided to listen to them all this year, and it was a really enjoyable trip through the tour before I had listened to the second Seattle show and bits of the New York shows, and then the 2 LA shows, and that was about it. Oh, and San Bernardino. So it was really nice to listen to all of them this year. At number 6, I have Long Beach on June 27th, one of the 2 used for How the West Was Won, as I mentioned. This show, the songs on How the West Was Won that are from this one are most of the shorter ones. Like Since I've Been Loving You on How the West Was Won is from this show and is perhaps the all-time best version. You might find a couple on bootlegs that are better, and 70-71 versions would be better for Plant, but as far as Page's solo and the instrumental aspect of it, you'd be hard-pressed to beat this version, and certainly with the sound quality, having it out there on an official live album, I wouldn't bother giving a casual fan any version other than this one to try to sell them on Since I've Been Loving You. And then Stairway to Heaven on How the West Was Won also comes from this show. And Page plays a really good solo on it. Dazed is not the version that made the cut for the album, but is very good. Page really goes wild on it. And the Whole Lotta Love medley is Boogie Chillin', Let's Have a Party, Hello Mary Lou, then Blueberry Hill thrown in there for the only time this tour, and the first time since the last show of 1970, and I believe the last time they ever played it. So this one gets a few points for that. And this show also has Over the Hills and Far Away and Dancing Days, which had been debuted a few shows prior, and shows at the beginning of the tour did not have. So that gives this one a boost as well. At number 5, I have the last show of the tour, Tucson, Arizona, June 28th. Pound for pound, as far as like, song for song comparison to other shows, this is pretty well as good as any of them. They really come out taking no prisoners from the start and play quite ferociously all the way through. The only thing holding it back from the 4 ahead of it is having a bit of a shorter set list. They only play one song in the acoustic set, Bronner Stomp, and only do the one encore, Rock and Roll. Otherwise, it could potentially be higher because they really are on fire in the desert the whole show on this one. And the medley includes Stuck on You, which is one of my favorite Elvis songs, so that gives it a boost as well. And Jones plays a nice little keyboard solo in the medley too, which is unique to this one. So yeah, a very good show to end the tour in Tucson. A really good Over the Hills and Far Away, by the way, this Tucson show. Yeah, every song's well played this night. And like I say, without those slight set list shortcomings compared to the ones ahead of it, could be higher, but Tucson is number 5. Number 4, I have the second night in New York, June 15th. I had a tough time deciding the order between the 2 New York shows because, similar to what I said for Tucson, song for song, it's very close. They're really playing with tenacity both nights, and both feature absolutely breathtaking versions of Dazed and Confused. I put the second night behind the first night because the recording cuts off during Going Down Slow, so we don't know what the encore sounded like or how many songs they played in the encore, but we do know that they played several in the encore on the first night. The second New York show is unique for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's the first show where they opened with the sort of droning background sound before they explode into Immigrant Song, which you hear an 18-second bit of at the start of the How the West Was Won album, but really it would go for about 2 minutes, and they started doing that at this show, and they didn't do it again after this tour, but Page and Plant especially had always been interested in drones, especially after their explorations through India and Morocco and that, after their first tour of Japan the year before. And it's also unique because it features Plant's first insertion of his Strider call at the end of Bronner Stomp, which was the name of his dog, a blue-eyed Merle. So this show's cool for that. The Whole Lotta Love medley at this second New York show is the longest of the tour as far as number of songs. They play 7. Boogie Chillin', Willie and the Hand Jive, Hello Mary Lou, Money Honey, Heartbreak Hotel, Bottle Up and Go, and Going Down Slow. So yeah, that makes this one neat as well. It also has a really good "Since I've Been Loving You" on the Year of Led Zeppelin post about this show. He writes that Bonham is like a tidal wave repeatedly crashing against the shore, and I think that's a perfect picturesque description of his playing on "Since I've Been Loving You" at this show. So there you have it. Second New York show ranks number 4 and could creep a little higher even if we had a recording of the Encores. Number 3 is the first New York show, June 14th. This one, the playing is very aggressive and powerful, like the second night, from the first note to the last. This show has been the stuff of legend for a while, as it's long been rumored that they played for 4 hours this night. And as much as it might be cool for that to be true, I don't think that it is, because with how long the existing recording clocks in at, which is under 3 hours, I just don't see where because there are hardly any cuts in the tape, and where they are, they're in pretty small, inconsequential spots. And there don't seem to be any accounts of encore songs played beyond the 4 that we have on the recording, even though it cuts off partway through the last one. So I just don't see where there's enough missing tape to get you to 4 hours. I do think there's a slight chance that although probably unlikely, that the second night in Seattle could have been 4 hours. It definitely, I think, would have been a lot closer than this night. But it doesn't matter. This show is fantastic, even if it wasn't 4 hours. It features a blisteringly fast and breathtakingly good Dazed and Confused. Page just flies through the guitar solo midsection, and Bonham and Jones are racing along to keep up. It's one of this one and The Night After, which we just talked about, are 2 of the versions of this song that can literally just make your jaw drop and you stop whatever you're doing and sort of sit there in dumbfounded, kind of like I am right now, I guess. This one features Bottle Up and Go in the medley, like the first night, or like the second night rather, did, but it also has Lottie Miss Claudie, which is another one of my favorite Elvis songs. Plant also teases Run Around Sue by Dion and the Belmonts before Dazed and Confused, which I always get a little kick out of. And then the encores for this one are one of the longer strings of encores for the tour. They play Rock and Roll and Communication Breakdown, and then come back out and play Weekend by Eddie Cochran, which is one of my favorite early rockers and early rock songs, that is. And I really like how Zeppelin covered it. They played it at the first LA 71 show, and that's one of my favorite live moments of theirs, so it's nice to have it at this show as well. And then they played Bring It On Home after that, and as I said, the recording cuts out partway through that one, but I doubt that there were songs after that based on reading accounts of people who were there. The show also features the first instance of Plant's Does Anyone Remember Laughter ad-lib in Stairway to Heaven, which I'm not really a fan of, but bears mentioning nonetheless. At number 2, I have Los Angeles, June 25th at the Forum, their favorite place to play. This show is an epic one, set list wise, one of their more legendary shows. They play, in addition to the usual set list on this tour, they add Over the Hills and Far Away, Dancing Days, and then do a pretty long medley and Whole Lot of Love, Boogie Chillin', Let's Have a Party, Hello Mary Lou, Heartbreak Hotel, Slow Down, and Going Down Slow. And then the second longest string of encores on this tour, Rock and Roll, The Ocean, Louie Louie by the Kingsmen, into an organ solo by John Paul Jones, which includes some of Sly and the Family Stone's Everyday People, into Thank You, and then they come back out again and play Communication Breakdown and Bring It On Home. So 7 encore songs, which makes it one of the very longest strings of encores in their career. They were definitely having fun at the Forum that night. And this is obviously one of the two used to make the How the West Was Won album. The versions of Dazed and Confused, Moby Dick, and Whole Lotta Love on the album are all from this show. The Dazed is very good. I especially like the outro jam on this one. Page plays some great licks. Moby Dick is one of the most intense versions I've heard. Bonham's really just beating his kit to smithereens for the whole 19 minutes, as you can hear in really good quality on the album. You can really hear just how hard he's hitting, and to keep that intensity level without any dips for the whole 19 minutes makes it quite a version to listen to. And then it probably has my favorite like very beginning part of Whole Lotta Love, just the way Page so violently jumps into the opening riff always makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. So I've always loved this show for that. And I love Louie Louie, so I like that they play that, one of the very few times that they covered that. And this show would probably be number one on pretty well any tour, if not for the How Good the One that's ranked number one is. So at number one, I have The Second Night in Seattle, June 19th. This show is one of the most legendary shows of their career. Unfortunately, it's represented by a mediocre at best audience recording that can be pretty annoying to listen to, but if you're able to develop bootleg ears for only one show, it would be this one. It's the only one with sound quality as low as it that I would recommend to people who are just past casual fan level, because the performance is that good. It's worth it. The recording starts partway through Immigrant Song, and in the last verse, so we hear Page's solo, which is good, and then we get one of the longest heartbreakers on the tour. It's over 8 minutes, and features very nice solos from Page, and Bonham and Jones are playing some cool stuff in it as they play some sort of the two of them are sort of in a unique groove all night. I like it. And then a very good Black Dog after that. And then the first of several surprises this night is after Black Dog, they bust out The Ocean for the first time and play it really well for a first attempt. And it's the only time that it was played not as an encore. So doubly unique from that perspective. After that, they play a really good Since I've Been Loving You, and then a fantastic Stairway to Heaven with Page repeating licks during his solo for a really neat effect. And then the acoustic set is one of the longest that they ever played. They do going to California, and then as the second surprise of the night, they play Black Country Woman for the first time, and the only time that they play it all the way through. It would resurface on the 77 tour, but only as a minute and 45-second prelude to Bronner Our Stomp. And it didn't appear on an album until Physical Graffiti in 75. So the fans on this night got to hear it 3 years before everybody else, which is pretty cool. And then That's the Way, Tangerine, Bronner Our Stomp to finish the acoustic set. And then one of my favorite versions of Dazed and Confused, if you can focus through the sound quality issues. It has a really cool lead into the bow solo with Bonham and Jones playing this really neat pattern that I haven't heard them play on any other shows, that I always throw in when I'm playing Dazed and Confused, and used to throw it in when I played it with my band when we were still together. And then during the guitar solo section, the interplay between Page, Jones, and Bonham is just nuts, and Page plays some riffs that are so good that I've never heard him play anywhere else, that I've had stuck in my head ever since I heard this version for the first time. And then Bonham and Jones again get into a cool and unusual groove during the outro jam, which unfortunately is cut. Even with the cut, though, this version clocks in over 28 minutes, so it was probably close to half an hour, if not scraping it, without the cut. Then after that, What Isn't, What Should Never Be, and then the third surprise of the night, the first appearance of Dancing Days, which is another Houses of the Holy song that they had just worked on when they were in New York a few days earlier. And they play it reasonably well for a first attempt. Following that is one of the best versions of Moby Dick. Again, features unique ideas and motifs and patterns and everything that I haven't heard on other versions, especially during the part with where Bonham's playing with his hands. But the whole thing is a really thunderous and entertaining version throughout, despite the tapers complaining, saying that they hate drum solos, hate them a lot. And there's a cut partway through, presumably because they didn't want to waste their tape on drum solos since they hate them so much. But it's too bad, because it's a really good version, one of my favorites. And again, I would include some of the unique ideas from it whenever I played Moby Dick back in my band days. And then after that, Whole Lot of Love is one of the longer ones on the tour. The medley starts with a slow arrangement of Boogie Chillin' before the regular fast riff kicks in, and then Let's Have a Party, which is actually the first time they played it on this tour, but they had played it in Australia and New Zealand. Hello Mary Lou, Only the Lonely by Roy Orbison, which I think is the only time they played that. I've never really heard them cover him at all, actually, other than that. Heartbreak Hotel and Going Down Slow, which is cut during the Please Write Mama section, and then we end up at the end of the finale, so there's there's probably a couple minutes missing there as well, which would bring this version of Whole Lot of Love to around 28 minutes, which would make it definitely one of, if not the longest of the tour. And then that brings us to the real highlight of this show, and what sets it apart, as if everything before that wasn't enough, and that is the encores. They play one more than the LA show at this night. On this night, actually, they play 8 songs, which I'm pretty sure is the most encore songs that they ever played. And Plant actually recalled that a few years ago somebody said something about this show, and he said, "Oh yes, the night we did 1,000 encores." So obviously the band knew that it was a special night as well and remembered it for a long time. So they start with the encore with rock and roll, and then they Jones launches into a a long organ solo, which he starts off with a little bit of Amazing Grace, which I always find really cool, and the crowd goes wild for it. And then, yeah, just a glorious organ solo after that, with the gospel-y mood having been set. And then it flows seamlessly into Louis Louis, which I think is the first time that they covered it. I know it's the first time on this tour. Supposedly did it again in Denver 2 nights later, and then obviously did it in Los Angeles. I think those are maybe the only 3 times they played it. I should have double checked that before. Anyway, and then from that straight into Chris Montez's Let's Dance. Oh, Jones throws in a bit of Everyday People on this one as well, just like the LA show. Anyway, and then from Let's Dance into a really good version of Thank You with a great solo from Page. So all of that between Thank You and the organ solo and stuff takes up 19 minutes. And then they come back out and play Money, That's What I Want, so a Smokey Robinson cover there. And then that one is cut after about 2.5 minutes, and we pick back up partway through the debut of Over the Hills and Far Away. So they're busting out a lot of new ones this show, as you can see. And from everything we can tell, the intro is missing, which is too bad, because it would have been neat to see how Plant introduced it and how they started it. But Plant's voice is good, which it wouldn't be for the high notes required on this one after 72. And Page plays a pretty good short solo on it. And then on top of all of that, they come back out again and play Dancing Days a second time, and play it a bit better than the first time. So yeah, just a divinely inspired show. Plant even says God bless at the end. And if a better recording of this one surfaced, I mean, surely the soundboard exists, because they were working with Shoko by this point. So I really, really hope that one comes out soon, because this is easily in the top 5, probably top 3, if not the best show of their career, and deserves an upgrade sound quality wise for sure. So that is my ranking of the shows on this tour. I think this tour is a very interesting snapshot in time as far as where it falls in their career, having just arrived at the top of the mountain, if you will, with the massive critical and commercial success of the 4th album, and sort of hearing them as Houses of the Holy was in progress, and then hearing them try some of them out in real time in front of the audiences towards the end of the tour, well before they appeared on the album, is really neat. So I really enjoyed listening to this tour start to finish this year, apart from the shows with no recording, obviously, and would recommend doing that to any hardcore fans with enough bootleg ears to make it through the recordings. Otherwise, definitely listen to How the West Was Won. I think it's one of the best live albums ever made, and is certainly enough to give a more casual fan an an accurate depiction of this tour. And I will see you next time. Class dismissed.